Welcome in. In this video, we're going to discuss basic Cisco router configuration. Now, I have set up in GNS3 our first router. We call it My Little Router. And My Little Router has two interfaces, each connected to a switch. They're not connected to anything besides those two switches. It's just connected to those devices so that the interfaces will come up so that we can show you how they're configured. And much as we did with our Cisco Catalyst switch, we're going to go through the first-time configuration, what you see when you first boot the router up. So here is the console to My Little Router, and I've snipped off all of the startup messages where you get the copyright and the memory notices and all those nice things like that. And this is where it comes up after it boots. Would you like to enter the initial configuration dialog, yes or no? So in this case, we'll say yes, we want to enter the initial configuration dialog. And in this case, we are going to go through the basic management setup. So we'll do yes, enter the host name, we'll call it My Little Router. It asks us for the enable secret, and for the enable secret, we will make it enable. And again, we have to enter the enable password, and it's for the same reason that we have to on the switch platform, because some older iOSs use the password instead of the secret. In this case, we'll do enable 1 since they do have to be different. However, where this differs from the switch iOS is this iOS comes up and asks us for the virtual terminal password, the VTY, or the telnet password. Now, even though this is secure CRT that I'm using, we are technically connected to the console, just like we were plugged into the serial port. And that's a function of the GNS3 router emulator that I have here. And we won't go too in-depth with the GNS3 in this course. It's a little outside the purview here. But in this case, we'll enter the VTY password of password. It asks us to configure SNMP network management. If you enter yes, just like with the switch, you have to enter the read and write community strings and a management network. We'll just say no at this point. We don't want to configure it. Now we're asked which interface connects to our management network. And unlike the switch, you notice that this does not by default have a VLAN interface up here that encompasses all of these fast Ethernet ports. And that's because, again, a router is fundamentally different from a switch. A router takes traffic coming in on fast Ethernet 00, for example, and if it's destined to pass through the router, it will go out fast Ethernet 01. At least in the simple configurations we're talking about for this course. In this case, we'll say fast Ethernet 0/0 is the management network. Well, I have to actually enter fast Ethernet 0/0. For interface cards that have multiple media types connected to them, i.e. fiber and AUI or 10 or 100 base T, it asks you which connector you want to use. In this case, yes, we're going to use the RJ45 connector, even though it is all virtual. Operate in full duplex mode, we'll say no. Configure IP on the interface, yes. In this case, we'll give the fast Ethernet 00 interface an IP address of 10.10.1.1, the subnet mask, and again, it defaults to the classful subnet mask for the 10.network. Since the 10.network is a Class A network, it defaults to the 255.0.0.0. In this case, we're going to extend that to be a Class C, just for the purposes of our lab. And now is listed out for us the configuration that this little wizard has gone through for us. You can scroll back up and you'll see the host name, the enable secret, so on and so forth. It's basically saying, hey, is this good? Is this what you want me to commit to the router's memory? In this case, we'll say save the configuration to NVRAM and exit, which is the default, so we'll just hit enter. And after it builds the configuration, it drops us into the normal console prompt. We hit return to get started, and then it goes line protocol, so on and so forth. And it shows that we restarted the system, in this case about 3 hours ago, when I first started setting up this lab. And it drops us into user exec mode, as denoted by the less than sign there at the end of the host name. So now that we've done our basic configuration, let's go ahead and enable. And we're going to examine the routing table on this router. Now, you'll recall when we talked about how routers work that there were 4 basic ways that routers know where to forward traffic. And if we do show IP route, it tells us that the default gateway is not set and that there's basically no routes in this router yet. Now, even though this is not CCNP troubleshooting, I've seen this message before, actually fairly recently. And the fix for this is we go into config mode, we do no IP routing, and then we do IP routing, which turns on the router. And now if we do show IP route, we see we actually have a routing table now. And it tells us that 10.0.0/24 is subnetted. There's one subnet, and it shows that it knows a route to the 10.10.10 network and it has a descriptor out here of C. And if we look up in the codes, we see that C is connected. Now, obviously, this router doesn't do very much in its current configuration. We have to configure at least one more interface in order for traffic to go through the router, whether that's a VLAN interface or this other physical interface on there. And we will get into this a little later in this section, but first we're going to talk a little bit about what routing protocols are. We'll do that in the next video, and this concludes our basic Cisco router configuration.